I'm curious to hear about Nick's conversation and what he's got to say about one game in particular against the Alabama Crimson Tide. Of course, these two teams got together in 2015, if memory serves me correctly. Derrick Henry went off late, and Wisconsin hung in the game, but I think 35-17 was the final in that one. Now we're looking at what the schedule bodes here in 2024, and the first couple of weeks were just released here. So let's pull those up. We've got Western Michigan on FS1, so let's start with that on August 31st. And just your thoughts about this opening run of Wisconsin games in regards to network assignments and kickoff times.
Yeah, listen, the one that's going to loom large for the first part of the season is that Alabama game. And until those two games before, I mean, listen, could be a little, I heard South Dakota is supposed to be a little bit better this year, a little bit better FCS school or best FCS team. Makes me a little nervous that game is the week before the Alabama game, because I feel like that Alabama game is just going to loom large over the first part of the season. But I like, as far as Western Michigan goes, Western Michigan and South Dakota realistically should be wins. Again, the second part of the first half of the schedule here at USC is going to be fascinating. The last time the USC and Wisconsin played was in the Holiday Bowl in 2015, I think it was the 2015 season, and Wisconsin actually beat USC. I think it was one of the first times they had beaten them ever. Part of me thinks that depending on the results of that game could really define what kind of a season Wisconsin has. As you can see right after that game, Purdue at Rutgers at Northwestern, very manageable first half of the season if you can at least split Alabama and USC. Then you're going into Penn State, or you're playing Penn State, Iowa, Oregon, and Nebraska the next 4 weeks. Obviously, that is going to be the defining stretch of the season. And it's highlighted for many people. Now, how good is Penn State going to be? What kind of jump is Drew Aller going to take? That is the question that everyone's asking with regards to Penn State. At Iowa, that's going to be difficult no matter what. It always is a slugfest between Wisconsin and Iowa. You would just hope that this year the Badgers could maybe pull some sort of offense out and see some sort of improvement, because I think that's really where the frustration started last year for Badger fans, is seeing an Iowa team that could hardly put up points. And it's not like Wisconsin's defense was horrible, but they weren't great. But their offense just looked completely outmatched by Iowa's defense, and that was really a home game, really frustrating to watch. So that Iowa, I see when I'm kind of going through the schedule, I'm kind of highlighting USC, Iowa, and that Nebraska game as kind of games that will decide whether the Badgers are, 8-4 or 6-6. I don't see, there's a path to 9-3, but I think as Wisconsin fans are looking at it now, it's hard to justify those type of expectations for this year, especially coming off the past two seasons that they've had, where they went 7-6 in 2 straight years.
Yeah, to make a comparison here, folks, think of it this way, and we did a full rundown of this when the Big Ten first announced scheduling format with the 4 new teams coming in from the Pac-12. So think of it this way. If you're a former Big Ten Western Division team, and let's say you had always played 3 teams from the East, that was the regular rotation. This season, it's Rutgers, Penn State. So there's only 2 for Wisconsin from the East. For most teams, it's 3. So you're basically displacing teams from the West, the former West, with teams from the Pac-12. So there's no Illinois. There's no, who else are we missing here? Illinois. And is that it for Wisconsin?
I think that is it. Yep, because they still got Northwestern. The protected rivalries are Iowa and Minnesota.
Yep.
Nebraska's still on there this year.
Okay.
Purdue's still on there this year. So really
Yeah.
they're only, I mean, you could probably chalk it up to they're taking away Illinois and adding in, pick your poison there, Oregon or USC as the
Yeah,
replacement. And then
you're losing an Eastern Division foe, so that could be good, that could be bad. It all depends. It's such a top-heavy split division. And then yes, you're displacing Illinois for either Oregon or USC. So this one's a bit different than the other ones I've reviewed in the Big Ten, where it was pretty much a straight swap that you're gaining 3 from the Big Ten East, and you always did have 3 from the East. So it was merely a look at who are you losing from the West, the former West, and gaining from the Pac-12, and that's usually not a winning proposition for anyone in the Big Ten West, where they're losing, let's say, in Iowa's case, losing Illinois and Purdue and gaining Washington and UCLA. Well, UCLA is probably not going to be necessarily a world beater, nor is Washington, despite coming off a national championship game. They're probably one of the most different teams from year to year that we've ever seen in college football.
true.
But to Wisconsin's defense here, in terms of a scheduling comparison between what used to be their chief rivals in the West for division championships, they're taking on the 2 tougher teams from the Pac-12 and USC, or the expected better teams in Oregon and USC, versus Iowa facing UCLA and Washington.
Yeah. We'll see what the dynamic obviously completely changes this year. And formerly you were always paying attention as a Wisconsin fan to, okay, who does Iowa play this week? Who does Northwestern play this week? Who's Minnesota playing this week? I don't think that matters very much anymore. You're going to be primarily focused on who's Ohio State playing this week, who's Michigan playing this week, Penn State, and so on down Oregon. It's going to be interesting to watch play out, because I don't know if it diminishes the rivalries. It might a little bit, because Iowa, Wisconsin, almost certainly every year for the time the Big Ten West existed was for the Big Ten West, or Northwestern in Wisconsin, or Northwestern in Iowa. It's going to be each game is going to mean something a little different this year now, and that part is disappointing about this expanded format. But I still think that those games, Iowa by all projections still has a solid chance at making the CFP this year, just because of the way their schedule falls, like you noted, Washington and UCLA. And then I'm not sure who they drew from the East. I want to say Penn State's one of those teams.
They've got Ohio State, but the other 2 are soft. They've got Maryland and Michigan State.
Yeah, and see that. And I feel like we've had this discussion before, Mark, where we talked about the lopsided, the way the schedules always seem to fall. Because if you were Wisconsin, if we're just doing Wisconsin and Iowa, there were years where Iowa played Rutgers, Maryland, and Ohio State, while Wisconsin played Michigan, Penn State, and Indiana. And I mean, if you have to play 2 of the big 3 over there, that was hard. Now this year, and the scheduling was just off balance. I'm not sure that the schedule is going to be completely balanced this year either. We'll see what happens. And Wisconsin a long time ago scheduled that Alabama game, but you look at the schedule, that Penn State at Iowa, Oregon coming to Madison, at Nebraska. And again, everyone thinks Nebraska is going to be improved at this point. We'll see what happens. But that stretch of games is going to really define what Wisconsin can probably be this year. And we'll see what happens because of it.
And then we've got the closing game against Minnesota. Are you a fan of a Black Friday game against Minnesota? I don't know if this is going to be something that the Big Ten's implementing going forward.
I always loved that tradition of turning on Nebraska and Iowa at like 2:00 on Black Friday. I do not like it for Wisconsin for a number of reasons, especially the 11 a.m. kick. A lot of people work that day. A lot of students will still be back on Thanksgiving break. I don't think it will be an easy ticket to sell. As someone who has tickets, I'm not sure that there'll be many people interested in going to that game. We'll see how it shakes out. Obviously, makes a ton of sense why they're doing it. You start that Friday with that game, and then you have the NFL game, and then you followed it up with the nightcap of Nebraska and Iowa. So I see what they did. I see what they were trying to do. I just don't know if the Big Ten, and in particular the TV networks, really are, hyper focused on the fan experience of the games anymore either. And I think that goes to show with that Alabama game being an 11 a.m. kick on Fox. It's a big noon kickoff game. It'll be a big game. Place will be packed. But don't you think that game is better suited for a 7 p.m. game rather than an 11 a.m. game? And what happened to the experience of college football being so focused on the atmosphere of the stadiums? And I feel like starting a game at 11 a.m. on Black Friday or 11 a.m. on any Saturday kind of takes sucks the wind right out of the sails of that whole atmosphere part.
Well, obviously, when Fox took over, and ESPN still had its share of Big Ten games up until last year, but it's generally been Fox taking over the biggest games. That, of course, that started in 2017. So they have counter-programmed ESPN and ABC, which had generally pushed their best games to 3:30 and to primetime with this big noon kickoff. And by all accounts, it's worked well. And certainly we've seen a slew of course, Ohio State, Michigan always play at noon Eastern time. And then falling in line with that, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Penn State would have been considered the best games and the highest rated games. And so this hasn't touched Wisconsin a ton, although I know they played Penn State at a big noon kickoff, but it hasn't touched them too much because it's been so. Fox just obviously gravitates to Ohio State and Michigan, so they fill up almost all those big noon kickoffs. But it is the prime time game. I know prime time is associated with night, but for Fox, that's the window.